and change, and everything changes. That's a very Taoist idea. And when things don't change, things get sick. That's
Mm.
basically how I think of the whole business of doing psychotherapy.
Mm. Well, we don't need to say any more.
I think we're just going to do a little talk about healing and the nature of healing and what it means, how it happens, if we can get to that. And maybe we can't do it all in one go, but we'll come to it again later. I think it's the most important thing we think about in terms of psychotherapy.
Well, it just made me think about we were talking about cooking, and it'd be interesting to think about, what's similar in relation to learning, to be a great cook, to or a lot of things. It's like what heals is is a kind of learning about in relation to yourself that you become a kind of conduit for that, or a way that can actually be drawn on in relationship or
Mhm.
complement relationship and live through experience.
But what about the general idea, which is that do you believe that there's a healing force, if you like, in the universe? That there is a movement in the universe away from things which are fallen apart to things which become more whole. So, for instance, you were talking about the cut on my hand. I don't need to pay attention to this. In fact, it'd be quite a good thing for you not to pay attention to it because my body and my immune system has got it all under control. I know that this will be gone in a few days and I don't need to think about it because it heals. And I always think that it's healing is natural and unhealing is unnatural. So that what we do is get rid of the things which are blocking the healing. And that comes from I taught osteopaths. I don't know if you know the kind of theory behind osteopaths, but they have this idea that the body is actually perfect. But what happens through all of the things which happen to it and the insults and the falls and the childhood stuff, it gets what traditionally is called a osteopathic lesion, which means there's a blockage, both physiologically and anatomically. So it could be a movement like we were talking about, it could be something wrong. And if you put that into alignment again, the body will do everything it can to heal. So you only need to take away the blocks to healing. You can't heal anybody. Healing has to come internally. And I think of that very much the same in psychotherapy, which it's what I call stuckness. It's stuckness in the person's physical body, in their psychological body, their spiritual body, their way of thinking, their way of feeling, their relating. And when we were talking a bit earlier about process, I think it's stuckness in process, that things are meant to move and change and everything changes. That's a very Taoist idea. And when things don't change, things get sick. That's
Mm.
basically how I think of the whole business of doing psychotherapy.
Mm. Well, we don't need to say any more. I know what came up for me there was that things do happen and either are undeveloped or and suffering, or that bad things have happened
Mm,
and they're out of alignment and they're malfunctioning and therefore not processing existence properly, and caught in different kinds of loops and knots of being and behaving and thinking and feeling. I think when that's happened, it's happened through relationship of one kind or another, even just with relationship with life, without enough support or stimulation. And so the way out of that is also relationship, is
right.
like an auxiliary ego, like somebody to be an auxiliary psyche that helps, supports, enables, sees where you can't see, maybe hypothesizes, gets alongside you and just seeing if that direction you're going together is actually creating a different kind of alignment, but also whether the person feels they're being seen, understood, and somehow supported in, they don't always have to understand it, but they need to feel it.
So I think of that very similar to if you have a child and your child runs around, falls over, hurts themselves. What's the first thing they do? First thing they do is they find their mother usually, or if they can't find the mother, they might find the father. It's always usually second on the totem pole. Runs to them crying. The crying is a signal to say something is wrong. It's not a specific signal. It doesn't tell you what it is, and sometimes children can't tell you what's wrong because they're
Mm,
just upset. So they come to you, and if you are a good parent, you just hold your child. You don't talk to them too much. You don't try to get them to think too much. You just hold them. And when you hold them, they will cry and then they'll stop crying and there'll be a little cycle. And it'll be two or three times where they'll cry and they'll stop crying. And eventually they stop altogether and they push you away and go off and play. So that to me is the healing cycle, which is it's built into us, which is that there has to be this holding environment, kind of, back to Winnicott, and that has to be strong enough and containing enough that
mm,
the person's able to experience whatever they need to experience in order to move through it. And it has a cyclical kind of nature. It comes and goes. It isn't a linear process. And
mm,
eventually they want to get rid of you. So
mm.
I always hope my clients get to the point where they want to get rid of me.
But in relation to what you said, nothing is ever that simple. That's a Whiteheadian concept. Nothing is ever that simple. When you said that, nothing, that every occasion of a child running to you is a unique occasion. And so you can't deal with it in a blanket kind of receptive way. They do need those things that you said, but every occasion, there is a vocal aspect of of you needing to sound, of of hearing, receiving,
Hmm.
wondering, oh, what's happened? You
Yeah,
sound so.
there's that, but you don't want to say the things which a lot of parents say. So what's wrong with you? The tone of voice. If you just get the tone of voice wrong,
Sure.
you've basically cut off that process, the natural process. Or if you say, "Hold on, I'm just too busy. Come back in a little bit," that's not going to work either. Or
Yeah,
if when you hold them, you're distracted, they can feel that. There's so many ways it can go wrong.
but there is a just right, um, at least an estimation at
Yes.
each time. And then you might adjust your estimation according to the feedback loop that you get, because there might be something that needs looked at specifically.
Yeah, yeah.
But so, I agree with what you said, except that it just feels like every occasion is a unique occasion of responsiveness and something has happened, without taking over the child's experience.
If you take that into the realm of psychotherapy, one of the things that it teaches me is that you're not meant to try too hard as a therapist. You have to trust the healing force within each person that it's doing its best. It may be not able to cope with it, it may be blocked in some ways, but it's always there. And I actually tend to think of my clients, I see the person with their difficulties, and then I see the person, if you like, as I would say, they are becoming the person they can become.
Mm,
I can't put that into specifics because, of course, you don't want to be specific. You don't want to say, oh, well, they'll be better if they're cured from their anxiety, or they'll be better if they're not depressed, or they'll be better. To me, that is not what I'm talking about. It's more like that they will be their natural self when the healing occurs, and they will be able to engage with people and with life as
mm,
completely and fully as possible for that person.
mm. I suppose on one level, I don't like the word healing. I think it's abused terribly.
Yes.
I think there's more something about, corrective experiences or developmental experiences or transformative or integrative experiences, but never that the healing sounds like there's something total, you
Well,
know.
it's medical, isn't it? It comes from the medical profession. It's a medical model, and it's the way in which psychology has been, I would say, invaded by more
Mm,
and more medical ways of thinking, which to me are completely inappropriate. Actually, first of
mm,
all, they're too materialistic and therefore and reductionist. And
mm,
they do not actually have a concept of, teleology, that there's a movement towards something, that there's a wholeness that you can actually move towards. And yeah, healing is not the right word. What we're doing now, a conversation to me like this, you
mm.
could say is healing, because healing comes from the word whole. So it is a movement towards wholeness.
Yeah, I think if we put the word healing on the shelf and say,
So what are we going to have instead? Wholeness is kind of where I prefer to go.
I like the movement towards wholeness.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
Yeah, and it's the movement towards. You never get to wholeness. There's
Yeah.
no completion. There's no like, okay, now I'm enlightened and that's the end of it.
Uh,
It's more like now I am
oh,
becoming and I keep becoming and I'm becoming something different each time.
no, that's good. Yeah, I like that. Everything's in a state of trying to kind of enjoy its pure potentiality and its creative novelty.
See, that's exactly it. Maybe that's what healing means, creative novelty. Because we know that people who are having psychological problems, they have very restricted ways of experiencing and seeing the world and experiencing themselves. They're not creative in the broader sense, in the way that nature's creative. Nature's abundant. It just keeps producing different things all the time. And evolution is extraordinary. I mean,
Yeah,
it's not like, okay, we're done now, we're going to stop.
yeah. And I think when we, like in Whitehead's terms, that we're, in Buddhist terms, we're all, and Taoist probably, it's the same, we're all interconnected. Everything's interconnected. And there is a whole that's already there processing away. And we're part of that.
Mm.
But if there's a kind of distortion, then there'll be changes that are subtle changes that are going on that won't necessarily heal anything, but it will kind of continue to process things in a direction that is, in one way or another, trying to move towards wholeness, restore its direction towards wholeness.
Well, that's the book I wrote. You know, I don't know if you remember what that's called. Seeking Wholeness. That's what
Yeah,
it's
you're
called.
the book. I've got a copy of that book. Yeah, no, I was looking at it yesterday, in fact.
Oh, that's right. Well, you should read the bit on process. It's because it's 20 something years ago I wrote that. But I was aiming towards where I'm kind of thinking now, which is that the unfoldingness of our
Mm,
experience, and not just the unfoldingness, but the way in which when things connect in the right way, it creates these systems which are bigger and there's more possibility. And
mhm.
that the more disparate we are internally and in our relationships, the less
Yeah,
we're actually able to engage with the world from a more whole place. So I've been
yeah.
thinking a lot about those kind of
Mm,
ideas and how to bring those into therapy because to me, it means that I have to show up
mm,
completely in therapy. There's none of this holding back, being restrained. I've got to be present and be there because otherwise there can't be a wholeness in the relationship between me and the other person.
I was thinking about the seven aspects of the Enlightenment process in Buddhism.
Oh, I'd love to hear about that because I need to get enlightened in this lifetime. So if you can help me, John.
Well, it's like process, the seven aspects of the Enlightenment process.
Uh-huh.
But but I love the first one is really just around contact, just around relationship, like awareness of something, like consciousness of something. And then the second is investigation, like there's curiosity. So you're inquiring more deeply into what's happening. And the third is energy, that sort of creates energy. And then the fourth I love, they call it rapture.
Oh, we're getting really rather nice by this time.
Yeah, yeah, and I love that like and I remember that in my work quite often when people are sharing things to when we're not dry but we're engaged and really kind of connected and there's a kind of congruence to the remarkableness of the process that's going on, then there is energy and rapture.
Oh,
You know,
absolutely. Yeah. I know a session's been good because I come away energized.
yeah, yeah.
And I'm assuming that's the same for my clients as well. I don't know. But if I'm having a really rapturous time, I'm assuming they're at least getting a little rapture.
And I see people respond to the more natural aspect of that instead of say a contrived aspect of it. If I contrive it, if I have to for some reason because I'm not switched on enough to that person or that time, that I have to kind of turn it on within myself, and it won't be as good as it naturally kind of
Hmm.
switching on. Yeah, but but when there's that contact, that quality of contact, then there's much more than almost like an energetic flow of shared experience, like you're co-creating reality and the other person is getting an experience of participation in that. And also, it's like a corrective experience in terms of
Hmm.
a
Hmm.
unlived life of early life experience of being attended to in that kind of way.
You experience that sometimes in a group that's really functioning well, that kind of energetic quality.
Yeah.
Particularly if you're the leader. I've often had really extraordinarily kind of energetic experiences in groups when the group has gone through all the early stages and has really got to a place where you actually have a whole group. I'm talking about wholeness, that there's a connectivity between the people in the group, which has created something which is different. You know, that
Mhm.
you talk of a system which is more and different than the parts, more than and different from the parts. That's the definition of a system. So I actually use the example of a car actually as an interesting system, which is every bit of the car has to be put together in exactly the right way because of the relationships between everything, and then the car works. But until you put a human being into it, it doesn't move because the human being is the final piece of the relationship between car and human being, which makes it do something.
Yeah, that's nice. And I suppose that's why in this direction we're going in the world at the moment of robots and computers, that it's kind of missing the point about bypassing. It's like a spiritual bypassing.
I think that I was having this discussion with myself actually, which is like, when does a tool stop being a tool and becomes a master?
Mm.
In the sense that this computer is a tool, we are using this very complex tool to create more opportunities, to create more choices.
Mhm.
And I think simple, go to a simple. You got your fork or your spade in the garden. There you have a tool. If you didn't have the tool, it'd be very hard to dig that garden. Okay. But you've got a relationship with that tool, which is simple. And the tool does not have a mind of its own and decide to go off and do something. I was in San Francisco recently and I took one of those self-driving cars. I really enjoyed it, actually. It's so interesting when you're being driven when there's no driver. And it talks to you, of course. And it seems intelligent, certainly more intelligent than some people. Anyway, but when does it stop being a tool and then it becomes something which takes over your energetic space? And I'm thinking about phones. I've seen two people on their phones cross from each other. And it's like, well, are they texting each other? What are they doing? Are they relating in any way? They're relating to their phones. The phone is in charge, obviously.
Oh, it made me think of Winnicott's phrase of being able to tolerate aloneness with another.
Oh, yes, that's a lovely phrase, isn't it?
something like that. And I
But you,
wanted to,
we should finish enlightenment because we only got to rapture.
okay. Um, the next one I often forget, and I have. I'm just going to have to look it up now.
It doesn't matter. What's the one after that?
The one after that are contemplation. It's more like a meditation. It's like where you more deeply discern, rest in what's what's happened, and like it's a completion cycle. And equanimity is the last one, I believe.
Is contemplation different from meditation? Because in the Christian tradition, the monastic tradition, meditation comes before contemplation.
It's more, I use it as a way of kind of thinking about dropping in and being curious about what's arising. And so there's a contemplation. It might be on something. It can be like a curiosity of what's here, what more is here. And
Is it
meditation,
cognitive or is it non-cognitive?
I would say it's more feeling curiosity and cognitive. It's both head and heart.
Right.
So there's an opening to there's a, yeah, a good head and heart connection of discernment, deeper discernment. But it's not necessarily, it can be used in a very deliberate way of looking, for something in particular, even if it's trying to recall something.
Hmm.
Meditation's more about wanting to abide in a spacious inner stillness and then just see what arises
Right.
and be able to stay out of relationship with that which arises and just be able to keep letting it pass. And when you catch yourself, getting involved in it, then you just let it go and go back to just witnessing.
So what's after meditation? In the Christian tradition, meditation has that active thing where you're doing something. But contemplation has the sense in which, because it's theistic, of course, which is that you're completely not doing something. Something is actually happening to you.
It's interesting, and I think I wouldn't be misrepresenting in Whitehead's thought that, you know, like say computers and machines and robots, that they're all coming out of creative novelty. There's almost like a need for us all to appreciate that there's a need to manage the power of these things. Just like our libido, we have to learn to manage the power, but also enjoy and be curious about what they have to offer, and try to guard against the kind of dangers of addiction, of overusing them.
So now we've slipped away from healing and then wholeness, and now we're on to robots.
Okay, so after I found it, after rapture, there's meditation, investigation, energy, rapture, tranquility,
Oh, that's nice.
and then concentration, where you are then able to kind of investigate in a more focused way, and then there's equanimity.
Where does enlightenment come? Is it in that
Yeah,
process
well,
or is
well, it's like a never-ending process of that kind of learning, opening, I suppose, learning to have a relationship with everything in that kind of way. So it's enlightenment isn't like some escape. It's a dynamic field of belonging, of
so
participation
would you say then that people are relatively enlightened?
on
I'm
one
talking
level.
about, rather than there is an enlightened being. See, the difficulty I've had with Buddhism in the past is there's enlightened beings and unenlightened beings, which seems very dualistic. So my experience is that a spiritual process is a never-ending process, at least during this lifetime. I don't know what happens afterwards, and that you are never anywhere except the beginning because this moment is the beginning of the rest. So whatever's happening now is the beginning. So there isn't any end point or even a kind of a goal, that it's a kind of a process as we've been talking about. And then you look back and you think, oh, well, it is different now than it was in the past. And I'm different than I was in the past. But I have
Uh,
no idea what's going to happen tomorrow.
that's lovely. You can say we've had so many beginnings.
Well, I came to that conclusion. I thought it actually really was very helpful for me because I was very goal oriented. I had decided that I would be enlightened because, I was reading Buddhist literature at the time, by the time I was 21. But it kind of didn't happen. And so I got a little bit disturbed by that. That just shows how spiritual bypassing works and how, self-deception and delusion is kind of built into even the search for spiritual enlightenment.
I think there's been a lower rational, goal-directed way of teaching it and understanding it. Even, for some of the great teachers, it's been quite goal-directed. Like the word even enlightenment is feels like it's something fixed, permanent, where it's never ever, I don't think, like that. You can connect and learn, but because we're on a collision course with the unexpected all the time,
Hmm.
and the novel, we therefore, enlightenment isn't like getting ahead of yourself and assuming that everything's the same on some level. So it's nowness, newness, aliveness, freshness. That's probably more enlightened when we can continually connect with that.
Well, we do know that there have been certain beings, and there probably are plenty of beings actually that we don't even know about, whose experience of reality is beyond what we would normally experience, where you really have a sense in which this person does not just feels the wholeness of everything, the interconnectedness, and doesn't have that as a conceptual way of experiencing, but as a full experience all the way through their being. And that from that place, the universe looks very different.
Those people who have what you just described, it's a line of development. I would go to Wilber's notion of levels and lines of development. I would say that they have a line of development which they're very good at, but they're quite often not very participatory in many of the life streams they could be used in and helped in or helpful in, but they also have things to learn about participation.
That's interesting. So, can you give me an example?
So in a very particular way, that person's, very developed, but could they easily kind of be house sitting for 40 adolescents having a birthday party for one of their mates? In terms of the breadth and depth of experiences and languages to be learned and musical instruments to be played, that all of those ways of marveling and participating were so, our field of functioning is so limited a lot of the time. Mine is certainly very limited. And all of those things I look on with great wonder, how remarkable those people's traditions have been and their backgrounds have been and the amount of practicing they've done
Right, right.
to have those particular lines of development.
But you're right, which is, we are now in an age where it's not enough, from my point of view, to sit and meditate on the top of a mountain. Maybe you will affect the energetic quality of the mountain. I'm not sure. But there's a lot to be done. There's
Yeah.
gardens to be dug,
Hmm.
vegetables to be grown. There's food to be cooked. There's a complete political system which needs overhauling from the bottom. I'm not going to be doing that, but somebody's
And,
got to do it
yeah. And
enlightened.
there, and there are so many other organisms on this planet that need to be considered in how we actually
Yeah,
live.
my birds need to be fed. My
Yeah.
bunny needs to be talked to because he seems to like that. Have we got time to do a short wrap up?
Okay, what we're left with from this session?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate, that there's something, I always love the word floundering, that, and it's great to be in a floundering together relationship that's dialogical about bouncing off each other and sharing ideas and knowing that, some of what we're revealing is just how deficient we really are. as well as how we've wiggled our way forward and learned things in life
Uh-huh.
but we're still learning so much, really. We're still needing each other and relationships and ideas and of what we might get from, say, going out and sitting in nature. Well, we might learn to have a different sort of stillness when we then go into the world and meet, more complex encounters. But to kind of stay out there and pretend that that's where it's at, it feels more potentially avoidant.
Well, I think it's actually just that point what you said. That's lovely what you're saying. But I'm beginning to think that that was a outmoded aspect of human consciousness evolution and that it has to change differently, that we are still evolving and we have to actually evolve into a different way of thinking about those things. What I'm going away with is kind of what I said earlier, which is when you and I have these conversations, something happens. Maybe the willingness we have to connect with each other and engage with each other's minds and feelings, new things happen in my brain. It's when systems come together, when things, relationships really cohere, there's always this newness that happens.
Mm,
And
mm.
it's a newness, kind of go back to your enlightenment, which has an energetic quality. You can feel it in your body. And I love going away from these conversations feeling kind of like that was something, but I don't know what it was, but I can
Uh,
feel it.
yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
It's like new highlights to kind of allow into myself for contemplation. But we must come back to the word tranquility and see what we even know, what we think that means. In a future session that we have, because it's an interesting word, tranquility.
Tranquility, yeah. Osteopaths talk about stillness a lot. I don't know if you know that.
Hmm.
Stillness, and there's a whole way of
Don't
thinking
they,
about it.
don't they call it dynamic stillness?
Yes, but we can talk about that. Tranquility, stillness, emptiness,
Hmm.
quiet, all of those things, to me, they're kind of fundamental.